Welcome to another exciting edition of American Warrior Radio, the place to be for news, notes, interviews, and current events for all issues military and veteran related. If you or someone you know has ever worn the uniform of the U.S. Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, National Guard or Reserves, you've come to the right place. American Warrior Radio right here on the Talk to Me station, AM 1300 WMEL, and online worldwide at 1300WMEL.com. Sponsored as always by AVET Project. Folks, you know this program is all about supporting our troops and their families, both past and present. So please get comfortable, grab a cup of coffee, maybe a glass of iced tea, and a pen and paper, because we're always efforting to bring you important information that you can use and share with others. With that said, let's roll down the runway and get this show off the ground. You all know me. I'm Garen Cohn. I'm an Air Force veteran, retired legal advocate for veterans, and founder of AVET Project. But you also know that I never fly through the airwaves alone.
Good morning, and at special request of my co-host Garen, I'm going to tell you what my rank was. I'm retired major from the United States Air Force, Glenn McGuffey, and I'm also retired for over 22 years as a manager of the County Veteran Services team. And we got a fantastic show for you today. You hear me say that all the time, but today is going to be extra special of the special shows that we bring to you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Garen. He has a quick announcement to make, and then he's going to introduce our fantastic guest for you.
I sure will. And folks, I just want you to know, AVET Project has always got things going on around the Space Coast where you can get involved and support us and help the troops. There's a community car wash which is going to directly support the folks of the 920th Rescue Wing. Those are the guys and gals that saved Marcus Luttrell out of the Hindu Kush Mountains. So if you want to get your car washed, or maybe you got a motorcycle, please stop by. It started an hour ago. It's going to go till 3 o'clock today. Okay, so you still have time. Listen to the whole edition. Have it on your car radio. Pull in, get your car washed. You got time. Make a donation to help. It's at Duke's Barbecue and Sports page, 228 Highway A1A in Satellite Beach. So please stop by. There'll be a bunch of warriors out there on their off time raising money so that they can have morale, welfare, and education events for themselves. And AVET Project is helping with that effort. With that, folks, like Glenn said, we bring you great interviews all the time, but there's no higher enlisted leader in the entire United States Air Force than the gentleman we have on the line with us right now, the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, James Cody. Sir, can you hear me?
Sure can, Garen.
Well, gosh, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us and our audience today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I'd like to begin by asking you to tell our audience, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. You know, where were you raised? Where were you born and raised? Why did you get involved? Why did you want to join the Air Force? Can you fill us in on a little of that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, I was born in Boston, Massachusetts. I actually grew up in the suburbs, southeastern part of Massachusetts. Norton is where I went to high school, and I came in the Air Force like a lot of young men and women do. Nearly 30 years ago. I wasn't quite prepared to head right off to college, although my parents were kind of encouraging me to go that way. I thought I'd come in the Air Force. I would do one enlistment, kind of get that under my belt, and then I would decide I think I had plans to go into the state police and whatnot. And, here I am again, nearly 3 decades later in our Air Force. I ended up going to aircraft control school down at Keesler Air Force Base. I joined right after President Reagan had fired all the aircraft controllers for going on strike, so the military had stepped into that void to provide general aviation aircraft control services. So pretty much almost anybody that was qualified coming into the Air Force at the time I did to do that job was sent to that career field. And that's how I ended up doing that job for 20 years in the Air Force.
Well, boy, this is Glenn, Chief Cody, and you jumped right into the fire coming right in.
And you must have done fairly well on your ASVABs too, because I know that's a critical career field. It was back then, and it may still be now. But not just anybody can become an ATC.
Well, they might have lowered the bar back then because there being so many. But you're right, it is a really chronically critical skill career field in our Air Force. And I think I was really blessed and fortunate to be given the opportunity to do it. My wife came in right around the same time as I did. Of course, we weren't married then, but she was about a month ahead of me, and came in under the similar conditions, maybe not looking to do the same thing after getting out, but came in just to kind of do something for a few years, and she ended up doing aircraft control for nearly 27 years before she retired as a chief.
Wow, total military family there. What about your folks or other family members? Had they been in the service before?
Well, for my mom and dad's side, no real military background. My stepdad was in World War II Marine and did an enlistment during that time frame, but really don't come from a military background by way of the way I would, kind of characterize that by the many men and women that I serve with in our Air Force today, which hear their kind of stories.
Sure, and folks, I want to share with you that I was privileged to personally meet the gentleman we're speaking with, which he is the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, and I'll let him explain in a minute what exactly that title entails. But I had the pleasure of meeting you, sir, during your recent visit to the Space Coast, and you were doing some awesome things, visiting all the troops, and I mean, really, you're such a humble and modest man, and you're a leader, and it just shines through. And I just had to let the folks know that out there, that we've got some of the finest people in the United States Air Force. Glenn, agreed?
Oh, well, I always agree with that. Not only the Air Force, but all our military branches. Those are the top 1%, as far as I'm concerned, of our young men and women. So, as the highest enlisted member of the entire Air Force, Chief, what are some of your responsibilities?
So, primarily I act as a personal advisor to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and the Secretary of the Air Force, and basically keep them apprised on all issues regarding the welfare, readiness, morale, and the proper utilization of the enlisted force. I also, represent our airmen in their interest to the American public and all those at all levels of government. Certainly have an opportunity to testify on the impacts of things that are going on in our military, on our airmen and their families. So, that's kind of, I think, what I would consider the big nuggets.
So you're essentially the top listed, and by that, what do we mean? We're calling you the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. How many people are wearing that title right now?
So I'm the 17th Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, so I'm the only one wearing the title.
That's the point I was getting at. I'm just trying to draw a correlation. If there was a general in charge of all the generals, that's what you are to the enlisted folks. You're the highest ranking enlisted person in the Air Force, and you've just told us and our listeners that you really almost play a role of advocate for all our enlisted folks, yes?
Absolutely. That's the primary role, is to ensure that I understand the impacts of service on them and their families, understand the challenges they face. I also have a responsibility to keep them apprised of what it is that our Air Force is doing and why it's doing it, representing the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief of Staff to our airmen, because there's obviously a lot of things going on in our military and in our Air Force. And just because of sheer numbers and capacity, we would all love to be out with our airmen every day and be able to have conversations with them every day about things of interest to them, things that are important that they know, but by virtue of just, time and distance, you can't do that. So I certainly represent the Secretary and the Chief to all our airmen.
And that's obviously an important role, maybe none more important, at least right now, because of the challenges our military is facing. You had a question, Glenn.
Yeah, skipping over subject matter a little bit here, Chief. Have you ever been deployed in support of Desert Storm, New Dawn, or OEF, OIF?
So I deployed, I've been over into the AOR countless times in various positions and roles, but, I specifically deployed over as part of Operation Southern Watch and Operation Enduring Freedom when we were still stood up at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, when we were starting to execute some of our first combat operations in Afghanistan.
And I think that's an important thing to mention, because it's like, if somebody doesn't know what somebody else has gone through, how can they, best advocate for them? Because, as you know, there's thousands of troops in the Air Force that have been deployed to combat theaters, and since you've done the same and you've seen what's going on there on the ground, what's your opinion about how these multiple deployments, and we're talking not just onesies, twosies, but 3, 4, Glenn, we've had guests as many 7, 8. deployments.
Yeah, it was a guy that worked upstairs for me that had 6 deployments.
So, Chief, and it's okay, because calling you Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force, Cody, that's a little long breath. I can call you Chief, yeah?
Absolutely.
Because you are a Chief Master Sergeant. You just happen to be the top dog, the top Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. What's the effect it's having on the morale of our Air Force, whether it's, they're on the ground or after they get back home? What kind of signs and signals do you get from these multiple deployments?
I think, Garen, I put it in this perspective to you. You kind of talked about it when you started talking about Desert Storm and Desert Shield. We've been in this region for 20 plus years, and we've been in really direct combat operations, for nearly 13 years now. And it certainly placed a toll on our force, for both the airmen that have deployed multiple times, like you talk about, and certainly their families back home that continue to support them. And we're blessed to have the type of folks that we do serve in our military that are willing to do that. But it is a pretty big spread when you talk about that. You have some of the most extreme examples of airmen, depending on their specialties, that have deployed just countless times. I mean, there hasn't been a year since we began this where they haven't been deployed. And then there's others to the other end of the spectrum that have deployed maybe once or twice because of the nature of what they bring and their mission set. But we constantly monitor this, and I would be telling you, as we move into this new normal in the future, we have a keen eye on what the effects are going to be. We have had a lot of airmen. When you think about this, 72% of the airmen that serve in our United States Air Force, and I'm talking about enlisted airmen, 72% of them have served less than 13 years. That's a pretty bold
Wow.
statement. I tell you about what we've been doing for nearly the last 13 years. So these airmen have only known an United States Air Force military at war in this type of environment. So when we kind of move to the future, to this new normal, we're going to have to really pay attention to that because, to be honest, I just came back from the AOR a couple weeks ago. We spent about 8 days out there at several of the FOBs in Afghanistan and kind of wrapped it up in Al-Udeid. And you want to talk about some men and women that are proud of what they're doing and are focused on what they're doing. I mean, I just could not be, I can't sing them enough accolades and praise for how they execute our Air Force mission over there. And I could say the same thing about all servicemen and women that I met over there. But, we are going to have to kind of closely monitor, the impacts of this. I think we have seen some indications in certain areas that have been highly stressed that, we have to kind of bring some tools to bear to help them kind of cope with what it means to operate not in that type of environment. But it's kind of unprecedented territory when you think about this is the longest sustained combat operations in the history of our country.
Oh, for sure, sir. I wanted to back up a moment, and for our listeners, I know what it means, but when you keep referring to AOR, tell us about that.
Yeah, that's the area of responsibility specifically, and what we're talking about, I think what I was talking about is Afghanistan, and I could take it back to Iraq prior to that.
Sure. So for all those listeners out there, you have pretty good contact and you maintain contact with our leadership over there, I'm sure both enlisted and officers, to gauge how our troops are doing, particularly on the Air Force side. But you mentioned that you work with and speak with other branches of service as well. It's not like you're just only dealing with Air Force folks.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can appreciate, Aaron, that this has been onset a joint fight, and when our airmen go to Afghanistan or other areas around the world, we execute with all the branches of service, and that's what makes us such a great military, is our interoperability and the way we complement each other.
And Chief, I know with multiple deployments that may not tell the complete day-to-day story. How many average hours does an airman work daily while deployed, and then maybe if you could, two-part question, daily while they're not deployed?
We're a busy Air Force, and, again, I would kind of put it like this. We're the smallest Air Force that we've ever been. And I think some of you heard we're going through some force management, and we're going to get a bit smaller, almost 17,000 smaller. At the end of that, we'll be the smallest Air Force we've been since we became a separate branch of the Air Force. I only kind of set that as the baseline. You go into the AOR, it really depends on what career field you're doing, what missions are going on. So on any given day, you could have the majority of an airman at one of our locations over there working, 16, 18 hours a day to accomplish a mission.
Wow.
And you could go to a mode where we're not executing certain aspects of what they do, and they could be doing a normal 8, 10, 12-hour day. So it's really dependent. I mean, we certainly have a bunch of folks over there that are out on missions that are just lasting day after day after day. So even while they may be getting some rest in those days, I'm not really sure that anybody that's deployed is off. At any given moment, they have to be prepared and ready to respond. They're certainly getting some work-rest cycles that are absolutely necessary to maintain focus. But I wouldn't put it in the same classification as we would back home, where I would say the same thing. Because we have so many people deployed, we have roughly 23,000 airmen in the CENTCOM area of responsibility, but we actually have over, just about 20,000 more airmen every day, 365 days a year, supporting combatant commanders around the world. Some of them at home station doing that, and others deployed around the world. So we're a busy Air Force, and we're pretty small to be doing what we're doing for our nation. But, the same thing applies. An 8-hour day for some work centers, 10 hours is normal, 12 hours it can be normal for certain work centers. What we really try to monitor in this whole process is to make sure we have the appropriate work-rest cycles available, and a focus of mine particularly. And I appreciate the fact that the show really only kind of relates to our service member, current and previous, but also their families. We are really focused in on this fact of how we maintain work-life balance so people can actually go home with enough fuel in the tank to spend meaningful time with their families.
Well, and that's great information for our listeners, and also reading between the lines, what I'm hearing you say is they do whatever it takes, and you already mentioned they're extremely proud of what they do, and I know with my experience when I was in Thailand and then Vietnam, we took a lot of flack as military people during those times, but I'll tell you what, my view of the young airmen that I came in contact with, loading bombers or doing whatever it took on a daily basis, was they were proud of what they were doing, and they didn't mind working whatever it took. So, it made it especially tough to swallow when you got home and some people didn't like you.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. And I tell you, we've been, and I think, again, a show just like yours, and, the American people, our government officials have been extremely, appreciative of the men and women that have served, and we're grateful for that appreciation. We truly are, that they recognize the service and sacrifice of the men and women serving, and those that have served before us. I think, I don't know that there's any way to rectify, the past, other than the fact to sit there and acknowledge the fact that that wasn't right, and show the level of appreciation I think that we do for all men and women that have served. I made a mistake on that previous when I was telling you about how busy we are. Telling you it's 23,000 airmen in the CENTCOM area responsibility. It's over 200,000 airmen that are supporting combatant commanders around the world. In addition to that, 23,000 airmen. So again, really busy.
Well, and I wanted to touch on another point you made. Only in the military are you going to hear the word rest cycle. Back home, everybody's going to the ball games, having barbecues, and they're going to sleep. We have our people going through rest cycles, but I'm appreciative of the fact that it is one of the metrics that you use to measure the effectiveness and continued effectiveness of our troops out there in the field. But it must really be eye-opening for you to see, as you mentioned, specific troops, or AFSCs, which is job specialty codes in the Air Force, being called upon to do 16-hour days, while others may only do, what in the civilian world would be like a 9 to 5. But everybody is there supporting the mission. It doesn't happen without everyone.
No, and I appreciate you recognize that and kind of calling that out, because you're right. I mean, you take any airman out of the equation here, any airman, and, you could then end up with mission failure. And, everybody understands what their role is. Our airmen are, very well trained. They're, extremely professional in what they do. They know what they're doing has meaning and purpose. So you're right. We monitor those things, and the amazing thing about, the great airmen that we have, and again, I could say the same thing about all service members, even when you tell them they need to go rest, it's countless times you have to force them to go do that because they just don't want to disengage. that committed to doing what they're there to do, that they're willing to push themselves beyond what is really, humanly possible, and we have to kind of take steps to make sure that no, we really need you up at a full round, not at a 75% round, because you've been pushing so hard. So we're really fortunate to have that kind of people serving in our military.
Exactly, and the leadership to lead them. Honestly, it's not just the guys and gals on the ground, but we've got to have good leaders that are backing them up and making sure that they have everything they need to accomplish their mission. And there's so much more we're going to get to during this interview with the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, James Cody, after the break here. But I want all you folks to tell your friends to jump online or dial up the radio. If you're here on the Space Coast, our signal reaches from Brevard County down into Indian River over to Orange up to Volusia. Now is a good time to get on the phone and holler at them to dial up AM 1300 WMEL. Otherwise, tell them to punch up their computer to 1300WMEL.com and listen in. This episode, like all the others, will be archived, so you'll be able to click on it and share it with others, because this is important information, folks. How often do you get an opportunity to hear directly from one of our chief leaders in the entire Air Force? The Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, James Cody. Folks, Chief, if you can stand by, we'll catch up with you right on the other side of the break. People, don't go anywhere. You're listening to American Warrior Radio on AM 1300 WMEL, sponsored by AVET Project. Be right back in just a moment.
All right, and we're clear. We just we're gonna about another 30 seconds.